Today I'm going to talk to you about how journalists can use AI to do different things needed in their jobs. And there's there's sort of two categories of this conversation. There's going to be routine tasks that journalists need to do related to an individual story or something they're covering. But then there's this concept of far more elaborate chained AI that can automate a lot of things for newsrooms. So I'm going to cover a lot of territory today, mainly because I use these videos for other purposes, and this is sort of the longest version of what I'm covering. So if you want to fall off, I won't be offended, but what I really want to talk about is how AI can be used in a newsroom setting if you are covering news or needing to create marketing collateral for any sort of marketing effort if you work in public relations or communications. So let's talk about what a journalist needs to do if they are working in a newsroom and they have a story. And in my old job, I was a journalist, so I had to do a lot of content creation, investigation, production, that sort of thing. The thing I want to stress is every application that has AI built in is going to be a series of jobs that the user wants to accomplish. Do they want to conduct a source analysis based on a URL? Do they want to fact check something based on an input of text? Do they want to translate content from one language to the other? All of those things have to be determined up front, because when we go to produce an application like this is a workshop application we use when we go into organizations to talk about this very subject. We're going to need to think about what models we're using, what prompt we want to use to get the right output from the systems. And then we want to think about the front end and back end experience, because front end designers need to worry about things like font, look and feel, that sort of thing, what color it is, what images are there, everything visual, how it looks, what the users think. But the back-end code needs to accomplish a reality against the task, meaning if I'm running content analysis to get some sort of understanding of a story, and let's just go in there, I want to be able to input some text and then be able to click a button. And when I click that button is the action that says, hey, go do something. And that's where the back-end code comes in, because we need to be very, very explicit about what we want these things to do in order for the pieces to all be put together. So I have in here a URL extraction where I can put in a URL and extract it. And I've loaded up 3 for today's conversation. One is based on Oklahoma City's race for the NBA championship last year, which was awesome. Sam Anderson, the author of Boomtown, which wrote about downtown Oklahoma City. I have an article that he wrote during that time for different purposes. And then I have a how-to article that my spouse wrote for a DIY magazine. So I'm going to use these 3 just to show how we would load up the text. And so if I'm using this Sam Anderson, author of Boomtown Reflects, when I click use, it's loading up a URL that I had already extracted into my database. So now this is here. And then let's say I want to be able to perform a content analysis. And I want to look and say, okay, based on this, I want to analyze this URL for optimizations, gaps, ideas. I'm going to click execute task. I'm going to produce the output so I can show you what it produces. And then I'm going to backdoor this and look at the way this is put together before I show some of the other things. Okay, so now I've loaded up my analysis, and then I've got the content analysis prompt that I've written in the background that is eliciting this output. And I can bucket this however I want. I went through and I said, well, when I run a content analysis, these are the things I want to know, the key themes and angles, and it's going to talk about the evolution of the team from Seattle to Oklahoma City, the cultural significance. It's going to give me elements that might be particularly newsworthy. It's going to give me follow-up questions, research directions, editorial value, whatever. It is whatever I want it to be, because when I go into the admin menu against a lot of this stuff, and this is where I had extracted out the content, and you can see this is stored in the database, those 3 articles that I showed you. So now, if I go into admin mode here, you can see the output I had. But at this admin level, if I go into the admin, I've got my admin dashboard with my system prompts managed in one database. And here, the content analysis prompt is loaded up here. You're a content analysis expert for journalism. Analyze the provided content for story potential, audience impact, yada, yada, yada. If I want to change what the output is in the application, I can change this prompt, and then I can identify variables in my database to be able to mix and match prompts to be dynamic and static text to create all sorts of things. And if I look at the default prompt and I wanted to edit it, I can load it up and save it. So a lot of the things that are the tasks that I'm going to talk about in this session are going to work just like this. But why am I telling you this? You might be going, this is pretty granular, pretty back-end stuff. Shut up, JJ. And I'm going to be like, no, this is very important, because if journalists can understand this very pattern, it is a system that we can use against different jobs that newsrooms would need to do. So here, let's get back to the fun stuff. So, okay, I'm in my tool set. All right, so from this view, I have all of the tools organized by purpose. So if I want to do anything now that I have those 3 source articles, I can go in here and launch a tool and know that the articles are already stored in my database, and I can perform any of these tasks. This is the one I really want to talk about, because everyone talks about how AI is going to affect everything in digital, and they're not wrong. But how it's going to affect it is going to be variable. I mean, if I work in news and content, my priority probably for the next year, year and a half, 2 years is looking at all the stuff I have in my database or all the crap I have in my archives, and I am trying to put it into a standard so that the new AI models can understand what the hell I've been producing all of this time. If you hear old technical terms like HTML, CSS, blobs, blah, 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 all of this technical language that used to mean a lot in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, all of that language is changing. And all content is going to have to be restructured and sort of formatted against a new standard. And that's going to start probably for you guys by categorizing and classifying a lot of the content you have now, and then grouping it so that your teams can work through what that might mean from a workflow perspective. You've got day jobs. A lot of people are running newsrooms and they really don't have time to go through and do this. But if we can build tools to say, okay, I've got an old story, let's load up the text, and let's just say, can you turn a shed into a tiny home? And you can, by the way. We can start to say, okay, well, on a URL level, let's use AI to force it into the standard. And I'm running it on an individual URL level here. But if I were batching this, it would work just the same. And AI makes that very easy. But here, I'm now taking this article and I'm identifying automatically the primary category, the secondary categories, the suggested tags, the audience segments, the editorial priority level if I have a team needing to do this work, and then any distribution recommendations, meaning how is this put out there in the ecosystem? Is it on a home page? Is it on a channel page? Is it on a blog? Is it on a social site? All of these things, if you work in a large global marketing organization, you need to think about how you're going to create it, how you're going to store it, how you're going to distribute it. And this distribute it is the ball game, because the channels are the message largely. And that's going to be true whether you cover news and politics, whether you cover, more channel or event organized sort of stuff. If you work for a brand, it is just the reality. So these sorts of tools make it very, very easy. And then I can go through, and if I want to say, well, I want to now classify this because I've categorized it, I can run another task that does that as well. And AI, because it is very prompt driven and very model driven in the background, gives you all sorts of ways to solve these problems. But AI is not going to solve it for you. You have to think about what you want your teams to do and build against that reality. And if we can use AI as a bridge tool and keep teams at the intersection everywhere they need to be, approvals, authentication, source attribution, bias detection, all of that, the tools can help, but we have to keep humans at that intersection level. And that's going to be accelerated by tools like this. Translation is something I want to talk about as well, because translating content, if we are going to be saying, well, move from one language to the other, if you only have 3 languages that your company supports and you need your content to be out there in 3 primary regions, you would be over investing in services if you did not consider AI as the way to accelerate that work. Not only can we make the application do it, we can enforce standards that would say, here's how you do it. And that is the ball game when it comes to these micro efficiencies that might help you move faster. The other thing we can do is start to measure out, if we're going to cover stories, what the impact is. So I've got in here editorial and quality control under this data classification thing. But really what I'm trying to stress is, if you produce a piece of content and you're not thinking about what audience you're going to reach with that content when you're writing it, then you're not really a distributor of content. You're not a journalist. You're not thinking through what you're trying to do from a full circle perspective. You're maybe just a writer, and that's not a problem. But in this omni-channel management world, we need to think about the jobs that need to be accomplished to get the content out there, not necessarily the roles necessary to accomplish it. Because if we can use AI as an accelerant and keep some orchestra conductor in the seat to say this is how things are run through, we should be able to at the beginning say, well, if we're going to cover a story, let's run some analysis to say, who are we impacting with this story? And because we can ground applications in specific geographic regions, or if I'm covering Oklahoma City, I'm going to be like, okay, this is my market, and I'm feeding that in another part of the application through background information. And I'm saying, this is what's important to me, so that when I run this prompt, all right, now it generated out audience impact. And I can then say, this is how it's going to resonate with who. It's going to provide valuable insights into what zoning and safety concerns, segments of court. This is all money. If I'm a channel manager, I can look at who it's going to affect from a persona perspective, because we're big into buyer personas when it comes to content and marketing. And then I can start to say, okay, here's how it's going to impact each one and why. This may just be an inform in a news meeting. This does not need to be something that a newsroom is reading and ruminating about. But if your teams aren't looking at this level of insights or thinking about journalism in this way, AI is just another way to think about problems before you go out and cover a story, so that your own coverage is 360. And that's key. So the other thing I want to talk about is a local knowledge graph, which is when we talk about the new web and what's needed, you'll hear the term knowledge graph. You'll hear the term now context graph. All these new terms have sort of this technical feel to them, but what they mean is structured content. We're taking data that is content, and we are putting it into a standard so that it can be crawled, indexed, and seen as we wish. Context graph assumes that we're going to have some measurement in the background of a platform that says why decisions are made. And that's a whole nother conversation. But if I put a piece of content on a page and you click it and you read it, context graphs going to keep track of that interaction, so that I could possibly marry your interaction with third-party data and figure out why you did it. And that is sort of this merging of what all the political coverage in the next 5, 10, ever years will be. We're going to be able to not only use AI to create content, good or bad, it's going to happen by good or bad actors. We're going to use AI for tools to make coverage better, to make it more competitive or stand out. But the big fear is that a lot of people are going to use content in bad ways, and so we can build tools to help us track election disinformation, detect bias in our own content. But this local knowledge graph one is going to look at a story, and it's going to say, in order to accomplish any of those tasks that I just talked about, we're going to want to be able to take it and put it into some sort of JSON or enforced code standard, XML, whatever, so that it can be put in a database and the relationships identified, and then we can start to paint together enriched content against any piece of content. Because if I can in the background store a bunch of things against a story that the user never sees, but I can crawl them and I can make them usable in my application later for whatever purpose, like translation, all the better. And then the tool becomes a walking reflection of your newsroom priorities. And that's the part I want to talk about next. There's a lot of questions about build versus buy SaaS software. Should you buy it? Should you build it? I have become, I use a lot of SaaS software in my job, and I don't not love it. I use a lot of different tools. But any company not thinking about their own organization through building the application, maintaining it, and supporting it often means coming up with features that SaaS platforms cannot easily accomplish. So the question I would ask yourself, build versus buy, is How willing are you to go with the grain in an AI age versus create your own path and then evolve your organization to that journey? Everybody's got a different skill set. Everybody is at a different place in their own digital transformation journey. And SaaS assumes you've got trainers that could say, here's how to use the software. It assumes that you would be able to maintain any sort of training documentation if things at that SaaS level change. All of that's well and good. And if you want to support it, go at it. But this other path, you'll hear it referred as mock, is build your own applications like this is. Know that it's going to be built with mock architecture, meaning microservices, APIs, cloud-based, and headless. That means the front-end presentation is separated from the back-end code. Then when we go to string together more complex AI together, like a campaign strategy flow or a crisis management flow, or how to prepare for an interview based on a newsmaker. We've got all the pieces together and they're properly formatted in order for a technical developer to be able to do this very, very quickly. And that's the part that is the real bottleneck. If you do a lot of your foundational work up front, you get your data model right, you get a team together that understands front end, back end development and how to deploy code. If your content is structured the right way, you should be able to assemble jobs to be done lists and with capable teams just move things through. If I want to do interview preparation or campaign builder as a more complex flow, I can then do it. And this is an example of a campaign flow. I've loaded up the test data, so you're not going to be able to, or you don't have to wait for me to see it. But if I want to say, okay, I'm launching a tech startup, my primary goal is brand awareness, my budget range is this, my campaign duration is 12 months, I can put in things like my success matrix, competitors. I could build in a flow that would automate this or automate suggestions, but for now I'm just showing you. This is an example of chained AI, where it's sort of a complex form, but we're taking outputs and in the background assembling different flows so that when this campaign is generated out, and it's white, so you can't see it. All right, I've got a problem with that. Then we can see it down, oh, here, that's the code view. So now, I've now had a campaign strategy document that says, based on all that data, here's the objective, positioning, key differentiators, concepts, messaging, whatever. This part, you want control over. So if somebody comes to you and says, well, use our SaaS software, we can do campaign strategy, inevitably, the first 3 months of that project are going to be collecting requirements from teams about what the platform doesn't do or collect complaints because users are like, this is how it used to be. So it's just a way to think ahead. And then if we can really create an application based on your strict requirements, the work is the prompt, the model, the front end, the back end code, and just making sure that it's correct in there. And then I can export this document. Well, of course it failed. I can export this document in CSV form, for example, and give it to somebody as an actionable item. This is not a public application. I don't give it to people. I use it when I do workshops to demonstrate these concepts. But where it gets very, very complex is if we're in a crisis management perspective, let's say I'll load in an example of when I worked in media about an OU football game that had a broadcasting problem. If I'm generating a crisis plan, I want to be able to have the user define all these inputs, and I want to make it easy for them because this is going to be the variables that go into those prompts, and we need it to be consistent time after time in order for it to run efficiently. But nobody wants to keystroke in all these details, so we want to make it very form-based, and that's where it can be very, very straightforward, but teams need to understand this so that when we get into how do we put these forms together, we're not talking about it for 9 years, explaining why we need to do it, how we need to do it, placating every person in the newsroom who might have a question about it. We're laying out it's a straightforward technical exercise. We need a form that collects all the things from the user that we want collected. In the background, we want to be able to merge it with models and prompts. We want to marry those prompts to actions so that when I create this plan, it knows what it's basing its logic on. And then when I click this button, the plan that is created is the output that I need to consider. And it's the output. AI is an augmenter. I don't use it to do my work. I use it to help me do my work. And then if I like it, I use it as an accelerator. But if I hate it, it goes in the dustbin, just like it did many versions of stories that weren't qualified for air back in the day. So for journalists, you're the ideal people to sit in this middle space. Everyone talks about journalists' jobs going away. I actually think it'll be the opposite. I think it'll be that journalism will be everywhere. AI is going to be everywhere. And because of that, the role of the journalist might be more filter and interpreter of the truth rather than a conveyor of it. Might be both, but. So if I can understand that this is what I need to consider, at least I can go to my boss and look at this and say, is this a good plan to follow? And because we can do this at that sort of read-in level, meaning pre-meeting level, it's worth its weight in gold to consider. So these advanced AI tools are mostly variations on this theme. I've built out things for different purposes, but if you're in journalists and you need to prepare interviews based on past history, team history, regions, conferences, blah, 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 fill in the blank, we can use it for that. And here's an example of like a local coach. If we can understand how to pass these variables in, and we've got grounded prompts that say, make sure what you return is from these sources, and make sure that you fact check it, and make sure that this is there, and make sure that this is here. This output is remarkably good. But when people don't know how to construct the prompt, and when they sit at ChatGPT and then they come to me and they go, AI sucks because I did something in ChatGPT and the output wasn't accurate, before rolling my eyes and being upset, I just want to kind of make sure that every person who uses AI understands this fundamental truth. The output is the quality. It's going to be the product of your input. So if your input is crap, you can rest assured the output is going to be as crappy. Excuse me. Is crap a cuss word these days? I figured it was not, so I'm letting it roll. But all right, so the last thing I want to talk about is this role of chained AI. I do a lot of work with colleges and universities needing to talk about, well, how can different places use AI? If I'm teaching journalism and I'm in a journalism school, I have people wanting to use it for tasks like I showed you, but then I've got people wanting to teach students about different jobs in journalism or different paths for career planning, or if they're going to take a path, how do they plan for their curriculum versus do the financial guidance, that sort of thing. So this is an elaborate career navigation hub to show those concepts, which is if I work, let's just say, as I do in, well, let's take construction technology director, because I'm married to an electrician, heavily support people working in the trades, especially as it relates to software and hardware being pulled together to solve things and save people's bodies, which trades are very extractive. That's going to help everyone do better. But I can then say, okay, well, if you want to be this job, this is your goal. How can I create the right career progression pathway to make you successful? What should you consider from a skills perspective? And something like smart technologies in buildings, you're all over the map. You're having to deal with standards. You're having to deal with what the new tools are out there. You're having to understand coding. You're having to understand how software and hardware merge together. If we're going to teach people to hold these jobs, these kids need to understand, and I say kid because I'm old, but young people are going to have to understand what their smartest pathway through is. And certainly, if you're working in the trades, you want to be able to start to earn as you learn. You're not in school all the time. You're working as you do so. So we want to be able to provide some level of here's how to do it. Here's what to expect from a salary and compensation perspective. Here's how AI is impacting this field so that you can start to think early about the ways that the different tools will affect you. Here's how data and analytics might affect it. Here's things to think about. If we can start to have this as an input, I can then go and say, well, based on this input, I want to plan out a curriculum. And I can say, I'm now, what level am I? Let's say I wanted to do it. I'm a working professional, baby. My career goal is to become a construction technology manager. Here we go, generate X. So this is an example of that chained AI. It's going to take that career information. It's going to ask me, okay, now, what's your status? What's your goal? Now it's going to generate the plan. All right, now I know, okay, here's a bachelor's degrees I could consider. Here's how long it's going to take. Typically, if I worked really hard, how hard would it take for me to get it? All of these things are inputs against that prompt. So I can get very, very elaborate. Often what I'm doing is dealing with the people on the streets, the faculty members, talking about this very subject so that the prompt can reflect what they want, and then the output is golden. And I love when the light bulb starts to turn on, because this becomes the conversation about AI that I see. A lot of people say, I use ChatGPT, therefore I use AI. Or I use Copilot, we use AI. No, you don't. You're using a product that someone is offering you that has AI. If you want to really use AI, you're looking at what models you're going to use. You're looking at what prompts you're going to put together. You're looking at what flow the user is going through to get what information presented back to them. And then you're building in iterations so that you get a competent team together, and then you can improve this over time and move it through cycles of improvement, which is the name of the game. The options are limitless, and this is where I'm just having fun, and I'm probably building way too much. But if I know then how to plan it, I can say, here's how to get financial guidance against different roles. And then if I want to be a cybersecurity analyst, then we can start to say, okay, this is how much you may have to incur in costs. And if my information is grounded, and I ground most of my stuff in Oklahoma and Texas just because that's where I am, it's easy to say, okay, well, let's look at the various programs around Oklahoma. Maybe there's a more affordable option. Maybe, and this is, I hate to say it, but as someone who went to a state school, who had to work her way through school, who also is married to someone in the trades, and we had to do the earn as you learn path, because in Minnesota their JATC program for electricians is outstanding. This level of visibility is what young people need to start understanding their options, and they don't get pipelined into a specific path as much as understand the paths and then figure out for themselves which one is appropriate for them. And I think this sort of education career exploration part of AI for faculty, university, admissions counselors is going to be key for people to consider as they move into the next 5 to 10 years. The last thing I'm just going to talk about is AI in data and visualization for journalists. And this is an image generation application just to show you some concepts. If you really want to do image generation for a newsroom setting, you should build your own application with your own team to inform the requirements. Literally, this is one I use for myself. So I'll just say cat on a fence is my name. I'm going to say my prompt is a cat on a fence. Let's keep it very easy. Looking at a full moon at night. And I want to say let's say it's a modern minimalist. I'm going to say what color I want it to be in, and let's say I want it to be in, let's make it bright and vibrant. And then I want it to be from behind. These are the variables that get loaded into the prompt. So you can think about this as a cat on a fence looking at a full moon at night in the style of modern minimalist, in the palette of retail bright and vibrant, and in the perspective of from below. Now when I click generate image, this is going out and it's seeking a model and a service to create an image. And I hope it does it, because sometimes it doesn't. But here, it did. Okay. So now, I don't like that at all. That's just whatever. But you get it. Cat on a fence, moon, full. It's supposed to be from behind. Whatever. I can look at it in full size. I can copy the URL if I just want to share it. I can download it. This becomes more just application programming, not AI. But this output is the AI, and it is controlled in a prompt just like this in the background of a flow. So if we can do image generation, and we can set our standard against image generation, we can also then start to think about, well, how can we show data, visualizations, images, and different things, and do investigative research based on AI. And I've hopped applications because this is the one that I built for sort of my own purposes, but it has a lot of the APIs built in that I want to demonstrate. The case I'm going to talk about today is the Karen Silkwood case, because it is an Oklahoma-based case. I know where a lot of the locations are referenced, and I'm going to show you how to pull them up and do screen grabs out of these. But we can also do research, and the Silkwood case has been the subject of some podcasts lately, and it's a 1970s case. It's the movie Silkwood. Go rent it if you have questions. But basically the gist is, back in the 70s, a woman was working at the Cimarron Fuels plant in Crescent, Oklahoma. All right. I am in places and I've looked at the former Silkwood site, and it's taken me to the location in Crescent where the Cimarron Fuels plant was located. If I wanted to do research on this, I can generate insights based on this location. And this is API driven research that I talked about because I've built this application, I've designated a location, I've set it in my code, and then I'm using that to say, okay, based on this location now, give me a location brief based on this. And this is going to say, okay, here's the site. Here's where it was in Crescent. You can see it's right related to Guthrie. Here's Cimarron City. You can see Edmond is where Karen Silkwood lived, and she lived on the boundaries of UCO, right behind the softball and baseball fields. And you could look at the path that she took going to work every day. You could look up the hotel she was traveling to in Oklahoma City. And you guys probably wonder, because I wasn't able to look up Karen Silkwood before, what the heck I'm talking about. Hopefully this will work this time. So she was an American lab technician, and she was working for her union reporting health concerns about the Cimarron plant. And on an evening, she was driving to meet a New York Times reporter from the Crescent plant, and this is where I could go back and say, okay, from the plant here. She was traveling to Oklahoma City to meet a New York Times reporter to hand over documents related to safety and health violations at the plant, reportedly. So if we had questions about where she was going, we could have that point of interest in the map. Okay, so now we can scan out. But if I were interested in covering this in satellite view, we've got the different overlay maps that we can then reference. And it's in this where, when we're telling data stories on air, we're often going to be using mapping information, which is on these 2D layers, which are labeled and referenced with points of information so that we can find things. But more recently, people want to bring in different satellite views to show, okay, this is what it looks like from overhead. You know, I can zoom all the way out and see all of Oklahoma City. Hell, I can see Stillwater over here. If I wanted to, I can then generate out different research briefs based on this point. So I'm looking at Karen Silkwood. I'm going to generate a person brief. This goes in the back and it looks for information about her. Gives me all the information based on that brief of the person, not of the place. And I can extract out these information points. I can then, because I'm doing this for my own purposes, do some light research on things I may have considered. What do we know about her? What were her motivations? What did she seek to improve? This goes in and it conducts research based on its own prompt. So I can go in the background and say, act like a researcher for the New York Times, investigate all these sources, come back with this brief and show me. So this output is going to be that. But the real beauty of learning how to build these applications for your own purposes is that we could bring in Wikipedia. We could link to that. We could perform YouTube research based on recency, based on what is mostly viewed. And that I'm going to come back to immediately in a minute. We could look at New York Times archives because I've got the New York Times, and we can integrate with their API with a key, and we can look at the oldest to newest stories related to her, plutonium worker, 1974. There's other things in here, but the video is what I really want to talk to you about, because investigative journalism used to be, hey, do you know anything about Karen Silkwood? Call the station or fill out a form. It'll get directed to a journalist and they may answer. I don't think that's going to be the future anymore. I think clues are going to be found in the strings of comments from people who see something online and share information through comments or through posts. And an example of that might be this. So let's take Karen Silkwood from video research from YouTube, the most viewed. Okay. The case of Karen Silkwood biography. Okay, let's take this highest one. I can open this up and I can say, okay, load in the comments. And that's gonna seek this out. At that action, it's gonna seek the API out. YouTube automatically filters some of the comments that are available in the API. So you may not see all the comments, but I'm loading up the top 300 sampled by relevance just to limit it so I can run my analysis. I figure 300 is a good sampling. But at this level, once I've loaded them, chain 1 in AI, I've loaded it up. Now I'm going to do chain 2. I'm going to say, look at these comments as your reference point. Now perform sentiment analysis. This is going to take all those comments and it's going to create a briefing report that says, this is what everyone's saying. Positive, negative, percentage. Here's why they like it. It's exciting. People are frustrated. They do like her courage, but they've got doubts about the death, obviously. We can go through and say who's commenting, what they're saying, intelligence, thematic. It's whatever we want it to be. It's literally endless. But the important thing is, from a build perspective that I want people to know, this is chain 2. Now I have this. And I can say, based on this, generate out a full insights report. Because pulling things together and presenting an output is different than generating out an insights report based on the sentiment. So I can then say, well, if I'm a newsroom manager, bottom line this for me. What does it all mean? And we can say, okay, here's that overview report. And I can say, the findings are, she's seen as a whistleblower. People are, very upset regarding the portrayal of her, because after the accident, there were many, many efforts to define how that story was interpreted in the public. There's a lot of people who talk about being there, or being there on the accident site, or seeing it at the side of the road, or knowing people who worked at the plant. All of those things we could detect, and we could say, okay, well, is there anybody that we should contact? Maybe there's people we haven't considered. We can think about it from what we want at the prompt level. What is everything we're seeking? And then, if it's available, elicit it from the comments. If it's not available, we can still say, we investigated it and pursued it. And we can also say, pull out some great quotes that we could consider in our coverage. We could do additional summary points. It's literally whatever we want it to be. The next step in this particular flow of analyzing video, sentiment analysis, and summarizing it would be to export it as a report so that we could then make it actionable in a newsroom meeting, either in CSV or PDF form. If I'm looking at researching the location of Cimarron fuels and want to do different things from a visualization perspective, I'm not researching. So let's close this panel. I'm instead trying to understand a location and then visualize it for an audience as it relates to other data I might have, other spatial data. So I can take this map. Let's focus back in on, let me go back into Silkwood and go back into places. All right, here's the site. I'm going to go into visual mode and I'm going to collapse that. If I want to go into 3D mode, I can toggle a button and this loads up another API that enables me to look at this in 3D mode. And in rural areas, the 3D effect is less impressive. I'll grant you that. But when we look at things like how she was driving down the road, this is the view overhead, and I could visualize this. So Karen left the Silkwood site, driving down Highway 74. Because we're all programming it with an API, we could literally follow her path all the way through. We could pan out. We could do the same thing. We could do slow motion. We could make it fast. All of this is not AI. This is APIs. But when you mix and match some of the capabilities, it becomes pretty cool because we can do in 3D mode. We can go to Oklahoma City. Let's back out. And I'll show you a cool 3D version of what Oklahoma City looks like. So if we're now then trying to say, here's where it was in relation to Oklahoma City, we can look at downtown Oklahoma City in 3D mode. And this does look more cool, I guess you could say. So this loads in, because it's a full 3D model, you'll see some interlaced graphics as it loads in. I built in a high res button so that when I do screen grabs out of this and I want to visualize this, it is screen grabbing that highest version of this map. And if I showed you what a screen cap would look like, you can see here it's very, very clean and it doesn't have those interlaced graphics, but you're loading up a lot of data. And we're loading it up so that if I wanted to say Silkwood was meeting somebody at the hotel and the hotel was here, I'm not saying it is, but we can then start to say where it is, and we can build in controls that really give us a lot of cool things that we could use on air. And for Oklahoma City, I mean, with the Olympics and everything coming up, this is the rowing center. This is where they're going to put in the new soccer field. This is, Bricktown Ballpark. This is Devon Tower. All of these things are very impressive in 3D mode, and we can really make great graphics depending on what the news event is or what we're talking about, and really, really show things different and do things a little bit different. So if I want to get out of 3D mode, that I'm paying for this, so I only use this mode when I really want to grab something visual or shoot something. Otherwise, I'm in 2D mode, and this is free. And I can do all my spatial analysis here. And if I wanted to look at, okay, let's take away from the investigative journalism bit and just talk about now the news event is the Olympics are coming to Oklahoma City and we're going to host softball and rowing. Here is the rowing facility. And we could then say, based on the rowing facility, show me all the hiking trails that might be nearby. If I get into 2D mode, out of my map mode, and I stretch out, let's go into a grayscale. If I want to start visualizing things like rail networks through Oklahoma City and how people can travel, I can start to overlay on top of my map all the different things that all the different services offer us. So this is rail networks. If we wanted to look at the U.S. interstate highway system, what's available? If I'm in transportation and logistics, that's going to be effective. But if I'm just painting a picture for a newsroom and I wanted to say how to get from one place to the other, this is going to be the information that I wanted to convey. If I am doing cycling analysis, where you can cycle, we want to say, let's clear this out because it's getting a little complex. See? My hiking trails did not load. I may have a refresh problem, but blink that out. When you're telling a story with data, it could be about a single location like the Silkwood site I was talking about, but relational data is important. And so if you wanted to explain where the Silkwood site was relation to Cushing, where all the oil pipelines are, we can begin to paint that picture with data as well and say, these are all the natural gas pipelines. These are the crude oil pipelines out of Cushing. We can paint a picture of where Cimarron fuel sat in relation to all these landmarks in Oklahoma. And because it's often this is what you are in the zoom level determines how much data is loaded in, but you can get very, very rich. And then what we can also then do from a data perspective, let me clear out everything. Let's just refresh this in general. So if I'm going to go back into a light mode, I might want to be able to visualize data sets that are brought in from different services. And I'm in a big city, Dallas, Oklahoma City. These larger cities have a lot of open data portals that you can access. But I pulled in 3 layers. One is for historical neighborhoods in Dallas. One is for historical events in Dallas. And then one is for the data sets of troublesome intersections in Dallas, just to show how we can be very exact in locations, but we can also be very broad in groupings of properties on a map or groupings of locations so that we can paint a picture with data. So let's get in here and I'm going to say, make this visible, make this visible, and make this visible. Okay. I am interested in moving probably in the next year closer to Dallas into one of these areas near downtown because it's got a lot of the historic areas, and I'm a big history buff and like to be nearer to the city. This is from the city of Dallas, all the neighborhoods that have historic designations. And then if we wanted to, we can get very specific and look at individual properties that are designated historic. This is a lot of opportunity for AI to help. Because if I can load in my location, let's just say Old Park, this is where JFK was taken after his assassination. I can load this up as my beginning point of my research flow. So if I load this up, it's loading up Old Parkland, and then all the AI stuff that I showed you, I can create based on loaded data as well. So it really is intent. What's the intent of the application? Because I built this for me and I'm just using it for me, and I'm interested in hey, why is this place important? Well, here's the context. It opened in 1894. It was designed by this guy. It's this style. But why it's important, JFK dying there. See, here's the history. This is a gold mine in research to be able to go now based on a certain place, show me everything in YouTube based on that location. And if I go down to my YouTube, it calls it Old Parkland Hospital, which I wonder. This can be a treasure trove for more comments, because if we look and we can say, well, the most viewed is, what if we took out this Old Parkland Hospital and said Dallas? We could get very specific. There, that's a lot better. So then we know we could then open up one of these videos, Parkland Trauma Room 1 Reunion, and then do that sentiment analysis and extract out ideas and things from these comments. Because if you're researching a story, let's say you're researching the JFK assassination in Dallas, you want to be able to go, okay, well, here's what they said at Parkland. And then someone who worked at Parkland is probably going to be watching that video, not a video of another JFK. They'd watch that one because it's relevant. They would be, well, I was there. I remember this, or I see this. Something like this, hour by hour. Some user might have sat and never contacted anybody with their story, but it might be listed there. So if we can identify those people and then put out a call to action on a newscast to say, call us, it might be a gold mine. Might come up empty, but hey. Who really killed JFK? New forensic insights. All these things are just gold mines. Oral history, we can pull out different audio extracts and watch the video if we wanted to. That's just the historic layers. The intersection information is, hey, here's the problems in Dallas related to intersections. I'm going to clear out this other data. Let's see. Okay, so these are the problematic intersections in Dallas proper, which means everything within this little ring I'm talking about. And if you want to see, oh, we have a lot of car accidents here, then I could hook this into a flow and say, well, show me all the car accidents near this Latin long. And I can start to accumulate data based on that sort of flow. It is whatever we want it to be, but enriching these data points with other layers is the opportunity, because I could say, well, these are the problematic intersections. Now let's overlay it with data from Texas using county information and show me how many people are likely to be driving alone to work when they hit this intersection, or they're alone. And we can say, well, based on Dallas County, 72% of people drive alone in that intersection at that time. And so this is where it becomes very, very important to know what you want this application to do. I'm solving a problem for myself. So when I build this, I'm like, oh, this would be cool. This would be cool. This would be cool. It's like a writer saying, and then. If you're building for an enterprise use case, you don't have that luxury. So what you want to do is make sure at the very beginning, you've got some sort of team, whether it's a business analysis team or a business analyst team or a technical team, to just say, here's sort of what we're going to be able to do in this time frame. Here's how to think about these problems so that you don't have to navigate a bunch of work explaining all this when you get to the work. Because if you have teams that understand it, moving at the speed of light with AI is not a problem. If you do not have teams that understand it, moving at the speed of light is an impossibility. It is at this data layer that I want newsrooms to understand that we're talking about combinations of AI flows and APIs, because this external information is coming in from services that I pull in the background. This is coming in from the data point that I pull in through the open data set, and the census layer is pulling in from API so that when that county information is presented, that we understand how it is, how those percentages are totaled. So if I scrub out this, and let's just say we're trying to visualize real estate prices, and I'm going to take all the individual data out of it. Now I'm just looking at broad visualizations. Let's look at Oklahoma and Texas. If I get into this map view, and let's just put it into something kind of cool, dark view here. I'm going to clear out this location. All right, so now I'm here. I want to be able to say, okay, show me, based on census data, the poverty rate in Texas. And you see, zoom into level 9. This is where only some of these levels are able to return data, and you'll see it's loading up the census data as you do that zoom level, because it wants to be able to present the most granular information based on the census tracts. But when we get into these very, very dense urban areas, that's different than county information. These census tracts are where the census says everybody lives, and this is going to be a marketing gold mine when we want to go through and say, well, in Austin, Texas, the poverty rate is this, the home ownership rate is this. This is also a untapped potential. Top 10 lists. Hey, these are the best properties in Zillow, and this is why, and this is how they are. All of the logistical and transportation use cases we talked about depend on demographic clusters being in one place with attributes that we can determine. And I think that's where this stuff is just fun to play with. And as you get deeper into it, and as we get closer to elections, not just next year, but 2 years from now, this stuff is going to be more than its weight in gold. You need to start building against that reality right now. Otherwise, you're going to be buying things to solve your problems. And when you complain about media companies not having any money, you can understand why. If I clear out this layer, I have built out sort of different features to do some of the things that are embedded already. So I'm not going to harp on too many of these other things, but I did want to say an example of the services we can bring in is most government agencies offer their APIs free with registration, and they'll give you a key. And so you can, if you're a developer, develop a lot with the data that they give you. And something like National Park Service information, which is the federal park system. If I'm doing a story on the Oklahoma City Memorial, I can locate this in the system, and then I can do preliminary research based on that location pulled in from that API. So this is AI driven off the API loading here, but it's just another example of people need to see the stories in order to appreciate them. And I know that the channels of Instagram, the video channels of TikTok and YouTube is where everyone talks about how these things are going to be distributed. I'm talking about the content you create and making sure that if you're a creator or you're a journalist, you can create your own tools to do a lot of stuff very cheaply, very easily. And investigative journalism is business intelligence. That's why half the people who work for the CIA probably are masked as journalists, because journalists are fact finders. They are the people who are supposed to seek the truth. In order to communicate that truth, though, it needs to be in a package that the audience understands. And visual data, data visualization, mapping, 3D, all of those things are going to be priorities. And if you can start to master the skills now to leverage them, you're going to be off to the races. Thanks so much for listening. I know I went through a lot today. I really appreciate it. Have a great day.